Hello everybody, my name is Sister Bridget and I'm really delighted to be invited to be the first speaker on this series of what is close to my heart. I'm a sister of St Mary of Namur, living at present in the community in Liverpool, but for a long time I've been very closely connected and helped by the parish of St Anne, and so delighted to come back today to be able to speak about the power of the Word of God in our lives. And this has been, as the series says, close to my heart. I've been very blessed in the last 10 years to be connected to many groups of biblical spirituality, finding the way through life, finding the calls and the grace of God, finding where do we go next in the path with God. So rather than just speak about what we've done over the last 10 years, I'll just take one of the texts of the last 6 weeks when we did exploring the unexpected in the Bible. And today I would just like to look at a passage that we know so well, which is Samuel, when Samuel learns how to answer to God, and maybe just take hold of it in a slightly different way and find out what's the power of the Word of God for us today. We often know about the night when he was still a child, when he learned to speak to God, how to answer to God. But sometimes we are less aware of the rest of his life and the extraordinary fruitfulness of the Word of God in the life of Samuel and in the life of Israel at that time. So we just go back to the beginning of the first book of Samuel, and it is a bleak passage. It's the time when the judges are just coming to the end. Samuel will be the last of the judges, and we know those years before the time of kings. The judges ruled over Israel, helped Israel at a time of cycles of unfaithfulness, cycles of difficulty, leaving God, falling apart away from God, and then having that strength and conversion, coming back to God, time after time, helped by those we call the judges. So Samuel will come to us as the last of the judges. But it comes at a time when we know God appears to be absent from the consciousness of Israel. We're told the word was only heard very rarely. The visions of God, the manifestation, the closeness of God, they said, was very rare. And the priest guiding the people to God at that time was Eli. Eli was older. He was blind. I think that means blind, not just the blindness of his eyes in old age, but blind to what was going on and blind to his responsibility, because his two sons were also part of the prayer center at that time. And instead of helping the people, they took money that were meant for the sacrifices, and these sons of the priest molested the women. Samuel was very aware of this, but did not have the courage, the moral courage to speak to his sons. So this is how we find the situation when we see a woman called Hannah. And Hannah is really the person who will change the story from being disconnected to God to being reconnected to God. She is a barren woman. This, whenever the Jews told their story, and when they told the story in the past, there were no books. This was the oral transmission, and it would always be, there's a barren woman. The children listening would know this is the time of God. If there's a barren woman praying, there's God listening. And this is what happens with Hannah. Her husband Elkanah takes a second wife who has many children. Hannah longs for a child to give to God. She is sterile. The way it's put in the Bible is that's her situation, that's her condition. It's not something that is going to be easily changed. But she goes to the prayer every year and prays with her whole heart. She pours out her heart in prayer. The Jews hold this as very, very sacred. Hannah is one of the greatest praying people of the Old Testament. But the priest doesn't see it at first. He sees and hears the outpouring and suspects that she's drinking or has been drinking. And she turns to him and says, no, this is not drink. This is the sorrow of my heart laid open to God. And he realizes, blesses her, and says, there will be a child. That very night, and it's very rare the Testament will do this, is explain the mood of somebody. And straight away, the first book of Samuel tells us she goes back to the evening meal with the family. Her face is changed. It's the power of connection with God changes her. So she goes home, she has the child, and she, as she has promised, this child will belong to God. And as soon as the child is old enough, she takes Samuel to the high priest. The very person who had not understood her prayer in the beginning now becomes the mentor of her son. And we know the story of Samuel growing up, and that every year Hannah will come back to bring him the garment, which is just that little bit bigger every year. And this is quite an extraordinary meeting between two very holy people of the Old Testament. Hannah is a woman of God, but she's called a prophetess. And she's given birth to a child who will be judge and prophet. So we have mother and child, prophetess and prophet together. And as he grows up, the extraordinary thing is that Hannah too has another 5 children. So they are both aware of a new presence of God. And then we're more familiar with that moment of the child lying down in the sanctuary and Eli lying down in the sanctuary. And it says the light had almost gone out. One way of looking is that's the situation in Israel. The other way, it's almost at the end of this night. And God calls to the child once, twice, 3 times. And we know the child runs each time to Eli. He doesn't realize first time, second time, but the 3rd time he knows. And he says, if you hear this voice again, say, speak, Lord, thy servant is listening. Listening is obeying. For the Jew to listen and to obey, it's one and the same thing. So we know the child will go back, speak, Lord, thy servant is listening. It's the beginning of a whole life. What will happen after this word is a faithfulness of God and an outpouring of the word of God. There are 3 verses that help us understand the incredible fruitfulness of a life once the word is accepted. In 1 Samuel 3, we have this text. The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. This has a double meaning. He let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground means that God is faithful to every word that he speaks to and through Samuel. And all Israel, in the same way, Samuel himself will let no word of God fall to the ground. It follows on, all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, from the city in the north to the city in the south, recognized that Samuel was a prophet of the Lord. So it's a child who's answered God. And from that one night of saying, "Speak, Lord, thy servant is listening," suddenly it's all Israel. In this moment when the word was rare, the manifestations were rare, suddenly now everyone knows God is speaking, and speaking to a prophet. And the Lord continued to appear. This is a wonderful opening of the heart to God. Once we say yes, it's the beginning of continual appearing and revealing. The Lord continued to appear and continued to reveal himself to Samuel through his word. And we know this prayer is no longer the prayer of one night. It's no longer the prayer of a child. It's the prayer of a whole life. And what happens to us if we allow the word to fall into our hearts and become faithful to itself in our lives. So Samuel will become judge, prophet, anointer of kings. When the people want a king, Samuel thinks this is not the right thing. You know what they will do. They will want authority. They will want money from the people. There will be taxes. God says, let it be. So the first one he anoints is Samuel. The second will be David. And through the life of David, David stays very close to Samuel. And it's quite a beautiful connection between David learning and Samuel, who has also learned from being a child. So we come to thank God for the faithfulness of Samuel, for the amazing maternity, the loving of Hannah, and also for Eli, who gives us, I think, great courage that we may be old, we may be blind in many ways, we may have missed the moral courage, but to have that moment of knowing the word of God is being spoken, and it's being spoken to a child. In the end, we owe a great deal to Eli to have accepted, to understand and to encourage Eli, to give him the prayer that we know, and knowing at the same time that this revelation of God would also be to judge his own family for their mistakes. And even that he accepts as well. So in thankfulness for this word, in thankfulness for Samuel, for Eli, for Hannah, for all the people who've taught us to pray, we too sit before God, stand before God, live before God, and ask him to speak into our lives. Speak, Lord. Thy servant, thy servants are listening. Thank you. Thank you. Bless you.